Hello and welcome to our talk about data science for pharmaceuticals, jointly arranged with the Chemistry Society. My name is Horia and I'll be your host for today. Here at Warwick Data Science Society, we want to highlight the connection between important research areas and data science. Today, we hear from two speakers, both working in data-centric roles at the pharmaceutical company AstraZeneca, discussing how data is impacting their work and how AstraZeneca is investing in data science. Our two speakers will approach the intersection of data science and pharmaceutics from different perspectives. The first, David McKinney, is a graduate project engineer with a background in chemistry. He will discuss how he transitioned from manual Excel-based workflow to learning Python to leverage data and tackle new problems. From other point of view, our second speaker, Tim Hargreaves, has a background in statistics and works as a dedicated data scientist in chemical development. He will offer insights into the importance of data scientists with domain expertise in chemistry, as well as data skills that will be critical throughout the coming years. Without further ado, I'll give the mic to David.
Hi all, and thanks for having me. So I'm David McKinney from AstraZeneca, and I'll be giving a bit of a talk on what we're doing at AstraZeneca to leverage data science, and particularly spinning it from a chemistry point of view. So how you can go from being a kind of classic benchtop lab chemist to bringing in some more data skills to really help yourself in your chemistry career, and kind of highlight what we're doing at AZ to help boost that. So a bit background to myself. I graduated 2 years ago from the University of Strathclyde, where I studied a sort of strange hybrid degree between applied chemistry and chemical engineering. And my speciality in my master's year was I was studying reaction kinetics. So that was very sort of data heavy area where you're getting different spectrum and new data readings every couple of seconds for 12 hours and that kind of thing. So that gave me a good intro to handling all of data. Then I moved into AstraZeneca on their pharmaceutical technology and development graduate scheme, and they threw me into the world of computational chemistry for my first 8 months there. So I quickly had to learn how to handle large data sets, learn some skills in coding, and I'll be discussing a bit about how I did that. And I'm currently working as a construction manager, so that's a bit different. So I've kind of left that behind, but hoping to get back to it at some point in the future. So what I'm hoping for you to take away from this talk is how valuable a tool data science can be for chemists. Obviously, if you're a data scientist already, it'll be good to see what you can expect from chemists in the future. Why data science and chemistry are a match made in heaven in a lot of ways. The truth about chemistry, that we're moving away from single reactions, kind of doing single things and getting small amounts of data, into the point where everything's becoming really, really data heavy, and we're going to have to start dealing with that and adapting our ways of working, or we're going to get left behind. I'll also highlight a bit about how learning data science isn't particularly difficult, at least to get started, and frankly, it's quite low-key fun learning to code. I've really enjoyed it. And what I really want to highlight is how much that if you invest time in this now, it can really help you stand out as a chemistry graduate, as someone who might be working in a lab, but then can also go away and have this sort of extra string to their bow of being able to manipulate and use data. So for me, before I sort of started working in a bit more of a data-centric role, data science was a word that was sort of batted around a lot. And I didn't really have a good understanding of what it was. So I've tried to give a bit of an explanation as to what my understanding of it is for chemists. And really, I think it's where you intersect computing skills, so areas like coding, programming and things like that, with maths and stats. So a bit of a knowledge of that is really helpful. And really applying your own scientific knowledge, so your actual chemistry skills, combining them all together is sort of what I view data science as in chemistry. And some of a few quick applications of what it can do for you. So having some knowledge of data science can really lead to a lot of smarter experimentation and better analysis. So one particular example is, some of you may have come across design of experiment style experiments. And this is where the old approach on the left, the OVAT approach, you'd basically do different experiments at fixed points on changing, say, the concentration of one reactant, and then vary the concentration of the other. And this can easily produce a false optimum. Now, by using statistical means and a bit more modeling, the more standard approach is to use a design experiment. And as you can see in the graph on the right, you get much closer to the true optimum by doing fewer number of experiments. So that's one really obvious application of sort of data science and statistical modeling. One other thing that's really useful is it lets you work faster, which less time manipulating data and more time sort of getting into what it actually means. And I was speaking to someone quite senior in AZ the other day, and they were saying that getting scientists to the point where we can get more value out of them and they spend less time manipulating data is super valuable for us. One example of this recently in AZ was we were doing what were called dissolution tests, and basically you drop a tablet in some medium and dissolve it up and check how long that takes to replicate what happens when it goes into the body. And originally, this was a very manual process to get the data out. It took over 30 minutes each time you wanted to take data out into Excel. You had to go through multiple programs, and eventually it came out with a really poor format. But fortunately for us, one of the students in our department knew a bit of Python, and he wrote some code which let us pull all that data out in an automatic way. It took less than 5 minutes, and the data came out in a really accessible, useful way. So that's a really nice interface between experimental work, little bit of coding that speeds everything up, and he became everyone's best friend overnight because he saved so much time for the department. Another application of data science in chemistry is predictive modeling. So you've got sort of two ends of this. One is using massive data sets like this paper here, which basically was people did a massive literature review looking at where reactivity is most likely to be and that kind of thing. And came up with a big set of rules to help you judge how reactive your molecule was going to be. And obviously going through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of papers, they needed some really good data science skills to manage that. And the other element is things like computational chemistry, which is becoming hotter and hotter all the time. And you can model molecules and make predictions about them a lot easier. So that's quite a quick overview of what I view as being data science and chemistry and where it's useful. And also, I'd like you to take away is that it's not that difficult. So I spent 8 months originally, and in that time, I was able to learn to code to definitely not an impressive point, and people who program and do data science for a living would probably have cringed and laughed at the code I was writing, but it's quite functional. And so you can get to there relatively quickly with a bit of effort. And this little Pirates of the Caribbean meme on the right shows that quite nicely, I think. So yeah, I'll talk about some more specific use cases in chemistry. Probably the first and most important one is data analytics. So with our experiments chugging out more and more data, it's really important that we come up with a good way of analyzing them and draw really good conclusions. And I'll come on to a bit about how you can step away from Excel in a minute and learn some other skills. Another element is automating lab processes. So this reactor that I've shown on the right, you might be able to see the holes in the top of it. It can basically take 5 or 6 different probes, whether they be things like NARs, Ramens, all different kinds of analytical techniques, and the reactor can automatically update when depending on what it's getting fed back. So it can increase the temperature if it thinks it needs to do that, and really helps to speed things up. There's other good uses of those. So if you can program, say it's a syringe pump for some flow chemistry, and that kind of thing. So more and more of those are going to be useful skills and help us speed up lab work. Then another useful one that I touched on a minute ago was data transcription. So moving data around from one place to another and really being able to manage it. So rather than just having it written down in a lab book, how can we get that all into a good place and into a big database where we can search it and really make the most of it? And finally, and possibly the most obvious use case, is computational chemistry, which you can't really do without some kind of coding, because you're looking for thousands and thousands of lines of calculations and that kind of thing. So you really need to be able to analyze them really quickly. And that's the beauty of it as well, is that in a lab, you might be able to do 10 experiments in a day with 10 different sets of conditions, whereas in a computer, you can do 1,000 experiments in a day. But handling all that data is quite challenging. So the first thing I'm going to touch on is a bit about stepping beyond Excel. Excel is an amazing tool. I really do like it, and a lot of people would defend it with their lives. But when it comes to 4,000, 5,000 lines of different, basically this spreadsheet had about 5,000 lines in it, each with about 50 different data points in them, and it's just so difficult to pull anything out of Excel. When you're using data sets like this, and that was generated through computational chemistry. So a good way of starting getting around that is learning something simple like Power BI or a tool like Spotfire, and then you can really start pulling out nicer visualizations than you can get in Excel. You might notice that no papers really have graphs from Excel as well, because they're generally done in better statistical softwares, and that really helps you to tell your story about what's going on a bit better. And then it's better for analyzing stats and trends and making sure you've got the right things. And eventually that helps you to draw better and more useful conclusions, which is obviously the ultimate goal of the experimentation. Now I'll give a little bit of an example of the way that pharmaceuticals and particularly chemistry is moving in the lab. No worries. So I'll just talk a little bit about how things are changing within the lab environment. And so what we traditionally might have done was started with put our starting material into a reactor, left it for 6 hours, 3 hours, whatever it is, got the product out and analyzed that offline, whether that be NMR, LCMS, etc., looked at that data, analyzed it a little bit, updated the conditions, and then repeated the reaction again the day after, and just written down the data, maybe on an Excel sheet, definitely in a lab book and that kind of thing, and not really had a handle on that for the future. What we're constantly moving to now is you'd start a reaction off and then monitor it in real time. So using process analytical technology, or PAT for short, that you may have come across. So things like in situ NMR probes and that kind of thing to monitor the reaction as it's going along. And then what you can do with that is feed that back into a program, which can then automatically update the reaction conditions. So you got a little bit of programming involved. And then we look to use that data from those models to build predictive models to make this better in the future. And really importantly, we look to store the data in a better way. So whether that be things like electronic lab books that are searchable, or big databases of reactions that you then need a bit of analytical skills to really take advantage of. We look to do a lot more modeling on those reactions to give us more understanding, particularly in pharma these days. We're moving really, really fast with how quickly we develop drugs. And so the ability to model more and predict more is really advantageous over the old approach of spending maybe a week doing one set of experiments and not actually getting the best result out the other end. So, and then a final application is sort of beyond the lab in computational chemistry, where you get a lot of areas like being able to predict reactivity before you even try it in a reaction. So you can pick which experiments you think are going to be most promising, rather than the sort of traditional chemistry approach of battering it on the head with a blunt hammer until it starts working. You can be a lot more intelligent about that. We can also do things like physical property predictions. So what's going to be the most likely to dissolve in certain solvents, predictive melting points if you're interested in that, predictive spectras. and we generally get more increased understanding. You may have also heard of the field of cheminformatics, which is where we try and describe molecules using numbers, and sort of help us with things like predictive reactivity. And particularly in pharma, we're looking at things like binding to proteins of our drugs. So trying to predict which drugs are going to be best and give the best sort of response when we put them in the body. And all this is sort of speeding up our process and making it a lot cheaper in general. So it's a really good area to be in, because you can be a good computational chemistry with some stats and some data analytics. Now, that's going to make you really valuable to pharmaceutical companies, and they're only hiring more of these guys. As I mentioned earlier, chemistry in general is also getting data heavy, and sort of gone are the days of the traditional bench chemist in a lot of ways. So much time is spent searching through literature, searching through databases. So having a handle on that is super, super useful. I've given this graphic on the left, which gives you a good demonstration of what's going on. So you can see that guys like PubChem and Reaxys that you've probably come across have got 100 million different molecules and compounds, and then over that in terms of how many experimental facts they've got stored. So with databases of that size, you really need to be able to tap them as a chemist. And then I was saying, this reactor on the right has 5 different probes in it, watching as it goes along, probably taking readings every minute or so, which is going to churn out a huge data set from one reaction. So you don't want 10,000 lines of Excel document. What you really want is a nice curve showing how the reaction goes. And so a bit of being able to manipulate that data is a super useful skill there. Then stepping aside from chemistry, there's more and more of a push for data science in all the rest of the business. One really important example is analysis of clinical trial data. So what we're now trying to do is identify people like subpopulations within large clinical trials who respond well to drugs. And that means we can then take them out if the drug fails and try it again in a different population who respond well to it. So really helping us to get a better understanding of how the drugs work and what population would benefit from them most. And these clinical trials churn out huge amounts of data again, and being able to analyze that is really important. In early phase chemistry, so what we call target identification, when we're looking for what receptor we're going to try and bind to in the body, that's all done computationally as well. And again, turns out huge amounts of data that we really need to get our hands on and manipulate. Another area more for the genuine software developer that's sort of coming up now is digital healthcare. So things like devices that are automatically linked to your phone, and so they require apps and things like that. And we're also seeing more and more of a push for in silico models when we go to regulatory approval. So when we're trying to get the drug launched, they really want to see that it also works as a model. So when it's in silico. If you want to type in any questions for me, then that'd be great. And I'll just move on to that and wait for those to come through. But just before I do that, where to begin if you're wanting to sort of get into a bit of coding and get into some data science? And I really recommend you have a look at it as a sort of extra element to your chemistry, because it's going to be more and more useful. So there's about 100 million billion books on different data science things, and that's probably not where I'd recommend starting. What you really want to do is try and find someone with a bit of experience, maybe the guys at the Warwick Uni Data Science Society, and get them to help you start out rather than diving into something like DataCamp or trying to read through a book, because they'll be able to put you in the right direction a lot easier than if you just start off yourself. And I think that's a really good way of starting. But obviously it's something that you learn by doing, and so you want to be writing code and analyzing data as quickly as you can. So I definitely push you to do that. And you'll almost undoubtedly fall into this trap as you go along of having a small little task that you is a bit annoying, might take you an hour to do manually. But why would you spend an hour doing it manually when you can spend a week failing to automate it? This is definitely something that everyone who gets into coding does, because they get overly ambitious at first, but it's all a good learning curve and it's good fun. But just sometimes it's better just to do the manual translation. With that, I'll conclude and take any questions. So, following on from that, I'll just give you a bit more of a broad overview of AstraZeneca as a company. So I've been there for nearly 2 years now, and because I've been on a grad scheme, I've rotated around a few different departments. So I think I have generally quite a good feel, and generally I can't speak highly enough of them as a company. They're a company who really do sort of one of our main values is putting the patients first, and it's amazing to see them actually do that and bringing medicines to market and things before necessarily always making the most money from them. Good example of that is Lynparza, which we launched a few years ago as a collaboration, whereas we could have made more money without that collaboration, but it got it to market faster, which was great. And so our kind of strapline is we push the boundaries of science to deliver life-changing medicines. And that's definitely true in terms of we really focus on science, and let the sort of chemists and the formulators and everyone in that kind of field, the biologists, kind of be quite creative with what they're doing, pursue avenues that seem quite quirky and a bit different, but quite often they come in and turn into blockbuster medicines. So yeah, they really do focus on the science, which is great to see. They've got a few kind of, the main portfolio consists around oncology. A lot of our products are in the oncology space, as well as CVRM and respiratory. And obviously they're one of the biggest pharma companies in the world with a big global presence and a lot of presence in what we call emerging markets. So that's basically guys who aren't the US and Europe. And then we also focus a lot in personalized medicine. So you may have heard that as a buzzword going around, but it's basically kind of what I was harking on to with clinical trials and looking for really specific populations to put our drugs into, rather than trying to get really broad populations. And that way you can often get much better outcomes for the patient. Some data from 2018, because I couldn't find the stuff from last year, but the company is worth, it's about 22 billion, and that's now significantly improved, largely because of we've had a really good run of approvals recently, so getting drugs through to market, which has been great. And what another thing I really like about AZ is the amount we reinvest back into R&D of our drugs. A few years ago, they had a really bad time when they sort of didn't have a good pipeline of new drugs coming through the clinical program. But recently, we've got probably the industry-beating pipeline, which is just full of drugs that are going to be big and on market. We've got I think it's around 70,000 employees now, actually. So really big company to work in and avenues for everyone to explore. And 45% of the senior roles are filled by women, which is always great, and that's always increasing. Again, as I was kind of talking about, they've now got an amazing pipeline, where we're getting multiple launches every year, and you can see the growth over the last years from 2012, where they had 7 what we call NMEs, which is where something is introduced to the market, and now we had 28 in 2018, which is an amazing outcome. And coming back to that sort of science focus, we did 102 manuscripts in high impact journals, over the last, which is a 14-fold increase since 2012. So you can see how much we're keen to share what we do in science as well, which is great. Global site, but a lot of the sort of R&D is done between Gothenburg, Cambridge, and Gaithersburg. But obviously over at Macclesfield, we have a really big site for what we call pharmaceutical technology and development. So this is more drug development rather than drug discovery. So how are we going to improve the chemistry? How are we going to scale up the processes and that kind of thing? And then how are we actually going to make it to on a big scale to get to patients? That's largely what we do in Macclesfield. And we also have a really wide range of medicines, everything from Nexium, which you've probably heard of, for heartburn, through to really specialized cancer medicines like Tagrisso, and then things for cardiovascular disease, such as what's on here, Symbicort. And it's been amazing to be at AZ during COVID-19, because it's been an absolute world-leading response, as I'm sure people have seen in the news. I don't think our company's ever been in the news as much as it is just now, with the deal they've got with the Oxford University to develop and sell their vaccine. So we've all got our fingers crossed that that's going to the trials are going to read out well for that, and we're in a position currently to put about 2 billion doses onto the market in the next year, provided that does go out, which is great. And if you want to find out more, then obviously you can find us on LinkedIn. I've also recently been informed that we have a YouTube channel, which has some really good, actually got some really good videos of sort of our senior leaders talking about a lot of COVID-19 stuff and what we've been doing, which I'd recommend checking out. They're actually really cool. And then if you want to find out more about the company itself and possible careers, they've got really good year-long internships. They've got 10-week internships. They've obviously got graduate schemes, and they sponsor PhDs and that kind of thing. So basically for all stages of your journey throughout uni. So thanks very much for having me, and I will hand you over to Tim.
Okay, thank you, David. So David has done an excellent job of describing the perspective of data science from someone with a chemical background. And now in my half of the talk, I will do the reverse and talk about what chemistry looks like for someone from a statistical data science background. And I really want to emphasize the point of the limitations of a data scientist that doesn't have that domain expertise, and the importance that we get people who know about chemistry and about biochemistry, engineering, etc., to develop their data skills so they can answer the questions that really matter to the pharmaceutical industry. But before we get into that, I'd like to discuss how Warwick Data Science Society can support you if you do decide to learn more about data science or about data thinking in general. And so to start off, we offer free teaching, or we will be offering over summer. And as David mentioned, sometimes the best way to start learning isn't just to dive in by yourself, it's to have someone to guide you in the right direction. And that's what we're trying to offer here. So over summer, we will be running boot camps in both R and Python. There will be no prerequisites for this. It'll be completely from a beginner's level of understanding. And by joining these tuition sessions, you can get access to live tuition, as well as being put in a small mentor group to offer you guidance on your learning and where you want to go in the future of your learning. And so we will be posting information about that on all of our social media over the next week or so. We also offer news and insight on what's going on in the field of data science. So we'll be soon launching a podcast which will offer kind of quick fire insight on the world of data science. So a nice quick fix of the important things you need to know. And then on top of that, we run talks and events. We'll be bringing a lot more of those when we're back in term one. And we're trying to focus on events that matter to each discipline. So focusing on biology, chemistry, and biochemical engineering to try and make sure we can focus on the things people care about. And then finally, we are trying to do a lot of interdisciplinary research in the society. So we run a research blog, and we are putting projects on there focused around all different sorts of disciplines and fields. And we try and support people and bring people together to work on these projects to try and build experience and to gain, try and improve their CV. And we also make this process as simple as possible. So if you like the idea of publishing some of your own work but were intimidated by the idea of starting your own blog, well then we can help you with that by setting up the infrastructure and making that nice and simple. And so if you want to learn more about what we're doing as a society and how you can take advantage of the resources we have available, you can find us on our 3 main social media platforms. That's Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. The links are here. And if you're interested in our research and the projects we're working on as a society, then make sure you check out research.warwickdatascience.com to see the latest there. And finally, if you're interested in the society, want to know how you can get more heavily involved, or have ideas for how the interdisciplinary interactions can be in the future, well then please reach out to hello@warwickdatascience.com. So now I'll move on to my half of the talk, focusing on why data science needs you, why we need biochemists, chemists and biologists, whatever, to come into the field of data science. And so I'll start with a little bit of a background about me. So my name is Tim, and I'm a mathematics and statistics student at Warwick, currently between my 2nd and 3rd year. And I'm currently undertaking a placement year at AstraZeneca, working as a dedicated data scientist. But that role is within chemical development, so I spend my day working with chemists trying to solve problems in that field. And I'm also a member of Warwick Data Science Society. And so how did I get into data science? It's actually a fairly short journey, starting only a few years ago. So up until 6th form, I really had no interest in statistics. I'd only ever considered, I'd considered maths to be the purest form. But then I started to appreciate this predictive side of statistics, and this idea that you can model things and predict the future from that. And then at the start of university in 1st year, I started learning how to properly code. And so really I only have 2 or 3 years experience of doing that. And finally, only about 2 years ago, I even discovered data science was a thing. At that point I started a blog about it and did my own projects trying to learn more. And the reason I want to emphasize this is that people might be thinking, okay, this data science thing sounds cool, but I devoted so much time to learning my degree subject that I really don't want to put that aside and learn something new. But really, data science can complement what you already know. And by putting a bit of time into it each week, you can then combine it with your existing skills to really solve some interesting problems and to push your abilities a lot further. And so now I'll do a quick introduction to what data science looks like at AstraZeneca, some of the interesting and cutting edge problems we're solving using this new field of techniques. So I'll start with crystallization imaging. So we have these probes that can take very high resolution images of crystals in a solution. So these are taken throughout time of these spinning crystals inside of a liquid. And these images by themselves are useful, but because there's so many of them, it takes a lot of time for a chemist to go through them and pull out the information they care about. So what we would really like to do is use some sort of data science technique to pick out where those particles are to analyze. And so this was a project that I worked on earlier in this year, taking these images and training a neural network, that is an algorithm based on how the brain works, to try and figure out where the particles are. And then from that, we can calculate the distributions of the shape and sizes of the particles. And these have really significant impacts on drug manufacturing, because if we can predict what these shape and sizes will be, which will influence flow rate and the density of the final products, then we can change parameters of the experiment on the fly to improve the outcome. And that can save really vast amount of money when the API we're dealing with is expensive. And so I actually have an animation here which hopefully will play, showing how this learning process happens. I've taken 4 images of crystals here, and I'm overlaying the predictions of this neural network. And so anything in turquoise is the neural network not being sure on whether it's a particle or not. And then the yellow is there is a particle there. So initially it's completely turquoise, it has no idea. But as we provide it with more labeled data, it starts to learn. And we can see that there starts to be tinted regions of yellow. And then those start to focus on to the actual particles and then figure out where the outlines are. So that carries on a few more iterations until we have some pretty strong results. And the final outcome looks something like this, where we really picked up on where those outlines are. And this sort of work can really affect how we are developing drugs and save massive amounts of money and time. And so it's a great application of what data science can do. Another example is something else I've been working on regarding the prediction of the end of reactions. And specifically, I've been looking at these second order reactions. That is, reactions where there are two reactants, A and B, and they combine together to give you some product. And that's occurring with a fixed rate K. And so often the measurements we get of this sort of reaction are incredibly noisy. We can see an example of that on the left here. And so what we would like to do is to predict when this reaction is going to end. That way we can leave it running overnight and stop it at the right time. This has important impacts for the environment. We're not wasting any energy. And also it means that we don't overcook our reaction, perhaps ruining the product in the process. And so this is a problem that can be tackled with data science and biostatistics. And we can see graphs on the right here showing a model's prediction as time passes of when the end of reaction is going to be, or of the underlying properties of that reaction. And they start off very wide, but gradually converge to the true data. And this is again an example of how data science is revolutionizing the field of chemistry and changing how we do these sorts of reactions. And so one final example is this creation of dashboards for analysis. And so this is some data on solubility experiments. And previously, this was found in an Excel spreadsheet of about 14,000 rows. And no one wanted to mine through that to figure out the patterns. And so one project I was asked to work on was to create some sort of visualization or collection of visualizations that would make it easier for chemists to gain insight and answer questions about this data. And the results of this were very substantial. We picked out on patterns that we hadn't seen before. For example, we have water at the bottom here. It turned out that many predictions for this were just completely off. The error bars are massive here. It turns out that we traced that back to the model. There were mistakes in the calculations for that model that was leading to this. And without that sort of data-centric view on this problem, we wouldn't have been able to discover that. And in the end, that really impacted how we were predicting solubility and in turn, how we were running reactions and experiments. And so that's some of the pros of data science, some of the big wins, but there's also a lot of challenges that data science is currently facing in the pharmaceutical industry. And so I'll take a moment to discuss that from two perspectives. The first is the perspective of a data scientist. And so I will happily acknowledge that I am limited by the fact that I do not have a background in chemistry. I do not have that domain knowledge. And for that reason, whenever I'm working on these projects, I don't really understand the data. I just have to think of it as generic numbers. And because of that, I can easily miss out patterns. I try my best to spot everything, but it's often the case that there are trends that will go missed. And also, because I don't understand this data perfectly, I have to spend a lot of time talking to people who have domain expertise, trying to figure out what they want and how I can understand the data. And that really slows down development, that this back and forth takes a lot of time. And finally, it's often the case that the objectives between a data scientist and the end user, a chemist, the objectives can often be misaligned. And so we can create a product and then a chemist can turn around and say, that's good, but it wasn't quite what I was after. And we have to go back and restart certain parts of it. Yet if you had a chemist with data science knowledge who could work on that product themselves, or perhaps communicate more clearly with a data scientist, then you can cut out that whole stage and get straight to the solution. And so from the other perspective of a chemist, and specifically a chemist who hasn't invested in learning any data science or learning the language of data, it can often be the case that it's difficult to communicate with a data scientist or statistician about your goals. And that can make it more difficult to answer the questions you care about or get done what you want to do. It's also quite hard for this reason to build trust that anything produced by a data scientist or statistician really answers what you want and is reliable. And because there's time needed to develop this trust, it can often slow down the production of any solution. And finally, if you don't understand the perspective of a data scientist or statistician, then you can often fall into bad data best practice. And so there are some simple techniques into revolving around making your data presented and stored in a clearer way. It makes it easier for data scientists to then go and answer questions with it. And if you aren't aware of how data science works or how you can best store your data, then you end up putting obstacles in place to make it harder to do this sort of work. And in the end, that affects everyone's time, and we can't answer the things we really want to. And when we're developing drugs that are, in the end, hoping to improve people's lives, it really matters that we can get to those solutions as efficiently and quickly as possible. And so I want to end this talk by discussing the future of what I think data science might look like. And this view is informed by talking to many people at AstraZeneca about how they see the future interaction between data science and chemistry. And so I want to start by mentioning the investment that AstraZeneca and likely other pharmaceutical companies are taking in data science. To start, there is investment in coding and upskilling. So me and David have both worked together on setting up the AstraZeneca Code Club along with a few others. And this is a group in which we try to teach complete beginners an introduction to coding so they can use that to solve problems in their work. And we've been going for about half a year now, and we've taught hundreds of people, and we have no plans of stopping, want to grow more and more. And the fact that we've been allowed to do that with our time at work, and that so many people are engaging in this material, is a real sign that this is the direction AstraZeneca is heading, and that there's a real benefit to learning these sorts of skills. On top of that, we have many talks about data best practice and other data-centric techniques. And these are shared with the department to try and make sure that everyone understands a bit of how data science works and is able to communicate in the language of data. And finally, we also have access to online teaching material and courses. And these cost money, so the fact that AstraZeneca is offering these is a sign that the company really sees the value in people developing these data skills. And some more kind of clear monetary signs that AstraZeneca cares about this is the mass hiring of data scientists, that we are bringing in more and more data scientists every day. And it tends to be that these data scientists do not come from statistical backgrounds. There are a few, definitely, but the majority comes from backgrounds in biology or chemistry. Because people who have that domain knowledge and can combine that with a bit of coding, a bit of statistical inference, and a bit of general data best practice can really answer some important questions. And so the fact that AstraZeneca is investing in that is a sign that we really need to be heading there in the future. And if you can get a head start on that now, well, then you're in very good standing for your job prospects in future years. There's also been more focus on data-centric projects, so more funding and approvals been put into projects focused around how we manage data and how we learn from data. And finally, there's been massive investments in hardware for solving data science problems, which is again another sign that AstraZeneca and likely other pharmaceutical companies too really care about pushing forward data science in the way they work. And so I want to leave people with perhaps a new perspective on how data science can be viewed, because I don't want people to take away from this talk that they should drop everything and become a data scientist full time. I think the key idea that me and David are trying to make is that learning a bit of data science, learning those key skills, and perhaps learning the language to communicate about data science and data in general, just that alone can really, kickstart your career and help you push further and answer questions you care about. And so I think perhaps the way to view data science and coding in general is as the new mathematics, that there's no requirement that anyone has a mastery of mathematics, but we would expect that people have a reasonable proficiency in it. And if you didn't have that, well, then you might struggle in your work or with communicating with others. And so really where data science shines is when you have that domain expertise in either chemistry or biology or in engineering, and then you combine that with a small knowledge of data science and a small knowledge of coding. That can really help you answer important questions. And then if you do need to answer more complicated issues, well, at least you have the language to be able to communicate with someone who has specialized in that field. And so really that's the idea I want to leave people with, that learning a bit of data science can really get you a long way. And so with that, I will end my talk and thank people for attending this. I hope they've learned something new and will give Warwick Data Science Society some consideration for how they can upskill and learn more in the future. So with that, I will pass back to Horia to, I think it's frozen, to do the outro of this talk. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and thank you, team, for your talks. Before we end, I would like to mention that we are launching the free R and Python teaching with access to mentors. As David and team mentioned, the best way to learn about data science is through having someone to communicate with and guide you through your journey. Also, check out our blog, research blog, where we post our latest research, and also keep an eye on our socials. Thank you for watching our talk, and we wish you a great day.